This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness Podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Hi there, and welcome back to the Demystifying Mental Toughness Podcast with your host, David Charlton. Today, again, very similar to the last few weeks, I'm going to be sharing a host of different tips and advice from our excellent guests. And as I mentioned last week, we're going to be looking at the control and the challenge aspects of mental toughness. And on this theme, I picked up on this very interesting story last week, or certainly an interesting approach from an athlete, an American tennis player, Danielle Collins. She'd been playing in the second round of the Australian Open tennis tournament. She'd been heckled a lot by fans, and then afterwards she came out in a press conference. And arguably, she antagonised the fans even further by her comments. She was talking about how the fans were paying her, how they were setting her up for a nice lifestyle with boats and fancy hotels and lovely holidays and travels and things like that. Now, I'm sure in lots of cases this wouldn't have gone down very well at all. Some people would perceive it as a touch arrogant, very brash, shall we say. However, if we think about these two aspects of control and challenge, I think it's actually quite clever, the approach she's taken. If we look at control, certainly the emotional control aspect, she could quite easily have got riled up by the fact that the fans were booing her and were on her back. But let's be honest, what good would that have done for her performance? She would have just got frustrated, annoyed, and then she would have let the negativity affect her performance. So it wouldn't have been a great thing, would it? So in some respects, what she's done, well, she's married the two aspects of emotional control with challenge by having a sense of humour. She's used the comments, the abuse if you like, as a source of motivation. So when we think of the challenge aspect, essentially what she's doing is she's challenging herself to take the fans on, and obviously take her opponent on. So rather than being intimidated by the atmosphere and letting it impact her performance, she's been quite clever in some ways. You know, if you think about it, a lot of athletes who are highly motivated and driven and single-minded, wanting to win, have a focus on outcomes, they can lose their sense of humour quite easily. They find it difficult to think flexibly. But yeah, there's something in that. She's looked at that very differently, which obviously crosses over to the emotional control aspect. So she's able to maintain her focus. She's able to maintain her drive and desire to win. So yeah, I thought I'd put that out there, as it really did intrigue me. Now though, you're going to hear from 10 different guests, as I say, around these different aspects of control and challenge, and then I'm going to wrap up with some news about where I'm taking the podcast in the future. Enjoy.
If you do have more of a perfectionist or, kind of do or die mentality, just being a little bit easier on yourself, finding some ways to provide self-care, whether it's taking a few minutes every day off screens, doing a little breath work, doing a little gratitude practice, do something that will help you get perspective, because it's very easy to lose perspective when all you want is a single thing and you're kind of relentless about it. So I would just say, if you want longevity in your sport and you want to feel healthier, find something that'll give you a little bit of balance and perspective.
3 takeaways would be, so I'm living my life now with passion, power, and purpose. So have a look at your life. Are you passionate about what you're doing? And you may not be passionate about what you need to do day to day. So for me, my example, my passion was to become a world champion. But I wasn't really passionate about going running in the rain, the sleet, the snow at 5 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't really passionate about getting punched in the face every day. But I was passionate about getting the outcome. So that's one area to look at. Then power. So for us to succeed, we need some inner power. We need to have that inner power. So if you can tap into that and find it and work upon that to fulfill on a purpose, what is it that you do want? What's your purpose? Because once you can connect with a purpose, the passion and the power, the drive towards achieving it becomes easier. But it's finding it, connecting with it, and tapping into it and driving towards somewhere, not go backwards.
the first thing and the most powerful thing is ask yourself a simple question. Why do you play golf? Get clarity around the why. And then understand sort of the differences between a mastery and ego orientation around that. Because again, by the time you're scared on a golf course, the cause probably started long before you being on the golf course. It's between your ears, and the way the dominoes fall is it has to do with oftentimes the why.
Yeah, absolutely. The first key takeaway is going to be just this acknowledgement, which is like, this is the awakening, right? This is the Neo moment. You just have to acknowledge you've been programmed to fail. And for better or for worse, like I'm working with some of the most successful people in the world who make millions of dollars. They're still programmed to fail in some way. Like, we're all strong in some areas and we're weaker in others. So just like the acknowledgement of that, so we can see the room for growth. So not to be a victim. It's just the acknowledgement and be like, oh, wait a minute. I've been like maybe operating at 8 or 9 out of 10 and there's a 10 out of 10. So the acknowledgement of that. Then once you awaken to that, the second key takeaway is that your entire experience starts with what's it feel like to be you in the present moment. And just giving yourself times in the day. And if you want to even anchor yourself into this, you can set alarms to go off maybe 5 times a day for the next week, just to ask you, how does it feel to be you right now? Just to get yourself back into that habit of just being aware of like removing the distraction, stop rushing ahead, come back to the present moment, because life is a feeling experience. We're looking to create specific feelings we want to live. And so you can't navigate to a new feeling until you're aware of the feeling you're having right now. So that's the foundation for everything, awareness.
Rather than forcing yourself, rather than telling yourself, right, I'm going to go out there and be swan-like and just never react to anything today. That's not going to happen. But just play that game, play the observation game, make a game of it. Give yourself a cross, give yourself a tick, depending on how you've reacted to the shots, and observe, see what happens as a result of that.
And then athlete, if you're struggling right now mentally, if you are in a place of anxiety or even depression around sports and you're just feeling beat down, beating yourself up, I want you to remember that sports are what you do. They're not who you are. And you're more than an athlete. You really are. And if you're on top of the world and you're working towards your dreams and your goals, I want you to remember that it's going to feel good. But again, you're still more than an athlete. So your accomplishments and your successes, again, they don't define you. Neither does failure.
Stay focused on yourself and what you can control is probably the biggest thing. You can't control what your opponent does. You can't control how your opponent's been training, or any intimidation tactics or mind games. You can't control any of that. All you can control is yourself and your response to it. So focus inward with that, I would say. And if things start to get riled up, just take a few deep breaths. Take 6 deep breaths and just let that activation in the brain calm down a little bit, and just recenter yourself first and foremost.
I've heard one of my other kind of great heroes in psychology, Dr. Kurt Strossel, who's another co-developer of ACT. He said that actually, psychology is pretty simple, really, when you're working with someone. All you're really trying to do is get someone to try something new. That's all you're trying to do. The reason they come in for help with a psychologist is because they've got into a little cul-de-sac, and they're struggling with something and they keep doing the same thing over and over again. And guess what? It's getting worse, not better. So all you're really trying to get them to do is to try something different. So I would encourage people listening in to do like a little behavioral experiment with themselves, over the next week. Just try it out. For instance, it might not even be in their sporting context. It might be, in the relationship they have with their other half. I quite like playing a little games for myself where, I'll be really disagreeing with my wife on something and she'll heck me for saying this. We're in the midst of a discussion, as you like to kind of invert commas. And then I'll just tell her that I love her. But with sincerity, not to mock, but kind of just touching base with the value. My mind is screaming at me to call her all the names under the sun, and I'll do the opposite. So that's an interesting little game, is kind of just doing the opposite of what your mind is telling you to do in a situation you're struggling in.
to enjoy the process, enjoy what you're doing and don't get too caught up in the outcome. Because if you're too outcome focused, you're then going to put a lot of pressure on yourself and a lot more things can go wrong. Whereas if you just enjoy, going out for your run and whatever, and, especially in running, I find a lot of the time, if people just leave the watches at home, that's when they run the best because they're not being dictated to by a few numbers on their wrist. They just run the way they feel and they're happy in their running and they run well. So, yeah, just kind of focus on the process rather than the outcome, and the outcome will just look after itself.
Structure, practice and skills challenges. You don't have to do this formulaic, I'm sitting down doing psychology. A lot of psychology can be taught through doing. So in other words, you've got to concentrate. You've got to use your routine here. If you start off a skills challenge and it doesn't start well, what are you going to do? You're going to rip it up and say, I'm not doing it today. You've got to deal with adversity, just like on the first tee, if you hit it OB, you've got to get on with it. And equally, if you've got some momentum in golf, I know players, that gets scary. I'm going low today. People start getting cautious. So the skills challenges can teach them can evoke those same emotions, and you can learn to deal with them.
For the parent to start, it's going to take everything in your power to resist putting on the coach hat first. Because we are wired as human beings, our brains will always naturally look for what's wrong, what's missing, what isn't right yet. And that's what our brains default to. And so as a parent, it's the same thing. You're going to be tempted to point out the things your kid didn't do well, point out where they still need to improve, point out how far they fall short from their goals that they say they have. So it's going to take a lot, but I would say parent hat on first, lead with love.
In addition to that, I would say having an affirmation or a mantra, or like we said before, a little word, something to cue a specific change for the good in your performance, that could be a good thing. That certainly worked for me before, as I said earlier. Different triggers, different anchors work for different people. It might be something auditory, it might be something that your coach can shout out, or it might be something that you see that might trigger that change. Okay, I see that now, I need to do this. Having those in place, I think, is a good strategy to have as well, because as we've said before, if things are going sideways, if you're fatigued in there or you're hurt, you need something to break out of that. And if you just start getting distracted and just not focusing inward and getting overwhelmed, as you said, David, but in that moment, needs something to break that, needs something to break that state.
Be careful of your reactions. The way that golfers condition their own fear is how they react. So the way that the limbic system, and particularly the amygdala, works is it recognizes pleasure and pain. So if I hit a bad shot, and after the bad shot, I'm embarrassed or I'm angry. Well, the brain experiences embarrassment the same way it experiences pain. It's a painful state of being. So, Dave, if you hit a bad shot, and after the shot I come up and I hit you, or I zap you and deliver pain and shock, and I do that enough times, you're going to be standing over a golf ball and your brain is going to be anticipating, if I hit a bad shot, pain is coming. And so all of a sudden you're shaking over a shot. And the way it happens in real life is I'm not out there, with a cattle prod, shocking golfers or hitting them. But I don't have to be, because they do it to themselves with their reactions. So the golfer who reacts badly to bad shots, and by badly I mean they feel shame or guilt or embarrassed or angry, any of these negative toxic emotions, well, that aggregates over time. And so you condition your fear by conditioning the amygdala to make sure that bad golf leads to pain, psychological pain. And the amygdala doesn't really differentiate between physical pain and it's pain. Pain is pain. So psychological and physical pain, there's no real differentiation. So I would say be really careful about your reactions and how you handle poor golf. Golf will beat you up by itself. Don't help it.
In some respects, actually listening back to some of these quotes, tips, bits of advice from my guests has been really, really helpful for me. And I hope it has been for you. But certainly for me over the last few weeks, and this episode in particular, has impacted on a big decision that I've made in relation to the podcast. If we're thinking about the control aspect, recently I've had a number of different events going on in my life over the last 6 months. And it's been tough to deal with. They've caused havoc with my emotions. They've caused havoc with a supposed can-do attitude. And I feel like it has impacted on my performance as a whole, certainly as a podcast host. I'd say my focus on the podcast has been closer to a 6 out of 10 than, say, an 8 out of 10 where I'd like it to be. So what I've decided with the podcast is just to take a little break. Now, if I go into a little bit more detail, what I've realised is, if we're looking at control and the emotional control aspect, is fear has held me back for a while. I've thought about pressing pause for a good few months, but emotionally, as I say, fear has stopped me from doing that. A fear of stopping something. In some ways, I've regarded that as failure. If I dig a little bit deeper, I've got to think about my values. I've got a deep-seated belief that I must be committed, that I must act on my promises. And in some ways, I felt like I've been promising to the listeners another episode and another episode and another episode. And as I say, I'd be failing if I didn't provide that. A big value of mine is making a difference. And if I didn't produce the next episode, I wouldn't be making a difference. So I've had to really practice what I preach. I've had to look hard in the mirror. I've had to recognise that there are downsides to being committed. Getting to 274 episodes and never missing a week, well, I should be proud of myself. But you know what it's like, you don't really think like that. And it is a bit of a pattern in my life. As a youngster, when I used to play golf and wanted to be a professional, I was so committed. I'd play until my hands bled. More recently, when I look back at the cold water therapy, going in ice baths, I did 429 days in a row until Easter last year of going in an ice bath. And it was only illness that actually stopped me in my tracks. So yeah, my decision to take a break, yes, it links to fear, it links to my values, and I've understood by listening to some of these bits of advice that I really do need to lean into the fear. I need to look in the mirror. Yeah, the learning orientation, the challenge aspect of mental toughness comes in there. What I recognise is, after seeking some advice from podcasters, from content creators, that it's very easy to burn out. You can lose your enthusiasm. You can lose your creativity. So, what you can expect is that the podcast will resume on the 14th of March. Then I'll be doing things slightly differently. So far, as I've been going through all the different episodes, they've been a bit random, in all honesty. There's been individual episodes, there's been guest episodes, there's been compilation episodes. I've switched from topic to topic. As I say, it's been a bit random. But moving forwards, what you're going to see is a series of episodes where I'll be interviewing guests. We're going to be picking a topic which I'll look at from a variety of different viewpoints over the series of episodes. How many episodes? Well, I'm not 100% sure just yet. It'll be something like 8 weeks in a row, or an 8-week series, and then maybe I'll take 5 weeks off to be able to refresh and re-energize, and then we'll go again with a further 8 weeks. That's not 100% cast iron certain just yet. That is going to be something that I consider over the next few weeks, exactly how that's going to work. So again, as well as the creativity side, there's going to be some planning takes place. I'm hoping by doing so, the longevity of the podcast, well, it will be sustained, and then my performance, my mental health will be an awful lot better as a result too. Yeah, these breaks at different times of the year, they're going to help me focus on different projects. And as I say, I hope to improve my performance as a whole on the podcast and for my clients too. So yeah, for you, the listener, that's my little update, my learnings. You know, it's only taken me 4.5 years to learn that lesson, but hey-ho, that's where we are right now. So you'll hear from me again on 14th of March when the next episode will be published. Until then, you take care, and I hope you have an enjoyable few weeks or so. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness Podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.